The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of Clarence's house as Charles sat at his mahogany desk, surrounded by official papers and royal duties. His reading glasses perched on his nose as he reviewed the day's schedule. The familiar sound of heels clicking on marble floors announced Camilla's arrival. "Good morning, darling," Camilla said softly, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. She had been his constant companion for years, standing by him through countless challenges and controversies. Her presence brought him comfort, a sense of stability in his often chaotic royal life. Charles looked up and smiled, though something felt different today. "Morning, my dear. How did you sleep?" Camilla noticed the distant look in his eyes but chose not to mention it. Instead, she moved to pour herself tea from the silver service set nearby. The ritual was familiar, comforting even. They had shared thousands of such mornings together, discussing the day ahead, royal engagements, and family matters. "William called earlier," Camilla mentioned casually, stirring honey into her tea. He wanted to discuss the upcoming charity gala arrangements. Charles nodded, but his mind seemed elsewhere. Through the window, he could see the palace gardens where Kate often walked with the children. Something about that image stirred memories he had been trying to suppress. Kate had always been different from the other women who had married into the family. There was a grace about her, a natural elegance that reminded him of someone from his past. Camilla continued talking about the day's schedule, but Charles found himself only half listening. His thoughts kept drifting to recent conversations with Kate, how she had handled herself during difficult family situations, and the way she seemed to understand the weight of royal responsibility without complaint. "Charles?" Camilla's voice brought him back to the present. "You seem distracted this morning." He looked at her, this woman who had loved him through his darkest times. Guilt washed over him as he realized his thoughts had been wandering. "I'm sorry, just thinking about the speech for next week." Camilla studied his face carefully. She had learned to read his moods over the years, and something felt different today. There was a restlessness about him that she hadn't seen in a long time. She decided not to press the matter, but a small worry began to form in the back of her mind. As they finished breakfast, Charles excused himself to prepare for the day's meetings. Camilla watched him leave, noticing how his usual confident stride seemed less certain. She had always known that being with Charles meant sharing him with his duties, his family, and his complicated past. But lately she sensed something else competing for his attention, something that made her feel uneasy. The phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was Charles's private secretary, informing her of a change in the evening's plans. There would be a family dinner at Kensington Palace, and Kate would be hosting. Camilla felt a strange tightness in her chest at the mention of Kate's name, though she couldn't quite understand why. Later that morning, as Charles reviewed documents in his study, he found himself thinking about Kate again. He remembered how she had comforted him during his mother's final days, her quiet strength during family crises, and the way she seemed to genuinely care about the causes close to his heart. There was something about her presence that brought him peace in a way he hadn't experienced in years. Camilla appeared in the doorway, dressed for her own royal engagement. "I'll see you at dinner tonight," she said, leaning down to kiss his cheek. As she pulled away, she searched his eyes for some sign of the connection they had always shared. Charles smiled and squeezed her hand, but Camilla couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental was shifting between them. As she left for her appointment, she wondered if she was imagining things or if her worst fears were beginning to come true. The day stretched ahead of both of them, filled with royal duties and public appearances. Neither could have predicted how this ordinary morning would mark the beginning of a change that would alter their relationship forever. Charles returned to his papers, but his mind remained elsewhere, while Camilla tried to focus on her upcoming engagements, fighting off a growing sense of unease about what the future might hold. The family dinner at Kensington Palace was set in the intimate dining room that Kate had personally decorated. Soft lighting from crystal chandeliers created a warm atmosphere, while fresh flowers from the palace gardens adorned the table. Charles arrived with Camilla, both dressed formally for the occasion. Kate greeted them at the entrance, looking radiant in a simple navy dress that somehow managed to be both elegant and approachable. "Your Majesty, Camilla," she said with a warm smile. "I'm so glad you could join us tonight." As they entered the dining room, Charles found himself watching Kate as she moved gracefully between guests, ensuring everyone felt welcome. She had a natural ability to put people at ease, something he had always admired about her. When she laughed at something William said, the sound seemed to fill the room with joy. Camilla noticed Charles's attention and felt a familiar knot forming in her stomach. She had been Charles's companion through so many family gatherings, but tonight felt different. There was an energy between Charles and Kate that she couldn't ignore, even though nothing inappropriate was happening. During dinner, the conversation flowed naturally between family matters and upcoming royal engagements. Kate spoke passionately about her work with children's charities, her eyes lighting up as she described recent visits to hospitals and schools. Charles found himself drawn into the conversation, asking thoughtful questions and sharing his own experiences with similar causes. "I've always believed that childhood shapes everything that comes after," Kate said, her voice filled with conviction. "When we give children hope and support, we're investing in the future of our entire society." Charles nodded enthusiastically. "Exactly. I've been saying the same thing for decades, but somehow when you say it, it sounds fresh and inspiring." William beamed with pride at his wife's words, while Camilla quietly observed the exchange. She noticed how Charles's face had become more animated than she had seen it in months, how he leaned forward when Kate spoke, genuinely interested in her thoughts and opinions. After dinner, the group moved to the sitting room for coffee and conversation. Kate excused herself to check on the children, and Charles found himself following her into the hallway. They walked together toward the children's rooms, their footsteps echoing softly on the polished floors. "You've created such a warm home here," Charles said, looking around at the family photographs and children's artwork that lined the walls. "It feels so different from the formal palace settings I grew up with." Kate smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "I wanted the children to have as normal a childhood as possible, despite the circumstances. It's important they feel they have a real home, not just a royal residence." They paused outside Prince George's room, speaking in whispers so as not to wake the sleeping children. Charles felt a strange comfort in this domestic moment, so different from his usual formal interactions. Kate's approach to motherhood and family life reminded him of values he had sometimes forgotten in the complexity of royal duties. "I admire how you balance everything," Charles said quietly. "The public duties, the family, staying true to yourself. It can't be easy." Kate looked at him with understanding eyes. "Some days are harder than others, but I've learned that authenticity matters more than perfection. People respond to genuine care and effort." Their conversation was interrupted by William's voice calling from the sitting room. As they returned to join the others, Charles felt a sense of reluctance to end this private moment with Kate. Camilla watched them re-enter together, noting the comfortable ease between them. As the evening wound down, Charles and Camilla prepared to leave. Kate hugged them both goodbye, but when she embraced Charles, the moment seemed to linger slightly longer than usual. Camilla noticed, and so did Charles, though neither mentioned it. In the car ride home, Camilla was unusually quiet. Charles attempted casual conversation about the dinner, praising Kate's hospitality and the lovely evening. But Camilla could hear something in his voice when he spoke about Kate, an enthusiasm and warmth that felt different from his usual polite comments about family members. "She's very dedicated to her work," Camilla finally said, testing the waters. "Yes?" "Incredibly so," Charles replied, perhaps a bit too quickly. "It's refreshing to see someone so passionate about making a real difference." Camilla stared out the window at the London streets passing by, her reflection ghost-like in the glass. She had supported Charles through his divorce, stood by him during public scandals, and helped him rebuild his reputation. Now, for the first time in years, she felt truly threatened. Not by scandal or public opinion, but by something far more dangerous. The possibility that Charles's heart was beginning to wander toward someone he could never have, someone who represented everything he had always wanted in a partner, but had never been able to find. As they arrived home, both Charles and Camilla carried the weight of unspoken thoughts. The evening had been pleasant on the surface, but underneath, something fundamental had shifted. Charles couldn't stop thinking about his conversation with Kate, while Camilla couldn't shake the feeling that she was slowly losing the man she loved to a dream that could never become reality. The following weeks brought a series of royal engagements that frequently put Charles and Kate in each other's company. At a children's hospital opening, Charles watched as Kate knelt down to speak with young patients, her natural warmth immediately putting them at ease. She remembered details about each child, asking about their drawings and listening intently to their stories. She has a gift, Charles confided to his private secretary as they observed Kate reading to a group of children. Some people are born to this role and others must learn it. She seems to have been born understanding what it means to serve. Camilla, who was attending her own engagement across town, noticed Charles's increasing absence from their usual routines. He had begun working later, claiming additional meetings and planning sessions. When she asked about his day, his answers were brief and distracted. During a joint appearance at an environmental conference, Charles and Kate found themselves seated together for the afternoon sessions. As speakers discussed climate change and conservation efforts, Charles found himself stealing glances at Kate, noting how she took careful notes and asked thoughtful questions during the break. "Your passion for environmental issues is evident," Kate said during a quiet moment between presentations. "I'd love to learn more about the initiatives you've been supporting." Charles felt his heart quicken at her genuine interest. "I've been working on these issues for 40 years, often feeling like I was speaking into the wind. But seeing young people like you embrace these causes gives me hope." They spent the next hour in deep conversation about sustainable farming, renewable energy, and the future of conservation efforts. Charles found himself sharing not just his public positions, but his personal fears about the planet his grandchildren would inherit. Kate listened with complete attention, occasionally touching his arm gently when he spoke about particularly emotional aspects of his work. "You're not just speaking into the wind," Kate assured him. "Your voice has prepared the way for this generation to take action. Everything you've done matters." The validation meant more to Charles than he had expected. For years he had felt misunderstood, his environmental concerns dismissed as eccentric hobbies. Kate's respect for his work and her genuine engagement with his ideas stirred something deep within him. Meanwhile, Camilla was dealing with her own growing awareness of the situation. Friends had begun making subtle comments about Charles's renewed energy and how often he mentioned Kate in conversation. During a private lunch with her closest confidant, the subject finally came up directly. "He speaks about her quite often," her friend observed carefully. "There's an admiration there that seems to go beyond family affection." Camilla set down her teacup with shaking hands. "I've noticed. I keep telling myself it's nothing, that I'm being paranoid, but there's something in his eyes when he talks about her. Something I haven't seen in years." "What will you do?" "What can I do?" Camilla replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "She's William's wife, the mother of his grandchildren, and completely devoted to her family. This isn't about another woman I could compete with. This is about an impossible dream that could destroy everything." That evening, Charles returned home later than usual, claiming the environmental conference had run long. He seemed energized, more talkative than he had been in weeks. As he described the day's events, Camilla noticed how frequently Kate's name came up in his narrative. "She asked such insightful questions," Charles said, loosening his tie. "It's rare to find someone who truly understands the urgency of these environmental challenges." Camilla watched her husband's face as he spoke, seeing an animation and passion that had been missing from their relationship for months. She realized with growing dread that Charles wasn't just admiring Kate's work or her role in the family. He was falling for her, perhaps without even fully realizing it himself. "Charles," Camilla said carefully, "you seem quite taken with Kate's environmental interests." He paused, suddenly aware of how much he had been talking about her. "She's very committed to making a difference." "It's admirable." But the brief hesitation told Camilla everything she needed to know. Her worst fears were becoming reality. The man she loved was developing feelings for someone she could never compete with. Someone who represented everything Camilla had never been able to give him. As Charles headed upstairs to change for dinner, Camilla remained in the sitting room, staring at the fireplace where they had shared so many quiet evenings together. She thought about their long history, the scandals they had weathered, the love that had sustained them through decades of challenges. Now she faced the possibility that all of it might not be enough to hold on to him. The irony wasn't lost on her. Charles had once left his first wife for her, and now she wondered if history was preparing to repeat itself in the cruelest possible way. The difference was that this time, the other woman was unavailable, making Charles's growing feelings not just painful for Camilla, but ultimately futile for everyone involved. Upstairs, Charles stood before his bedroom mirror, trying to understand the emotions stirring within him. He had always cared about Kate as William's wife and the mother of his grandchildren. But lately those feelings had evolved into something deeper, something that made him question everything he thought he knew about love and loyalty. The turning point came during a private family gathering at Balmoral Castle. The Scottish Highlands provided a peaceful backdrop for what was meant to be a relaxing weekend away from public duties. Charles had invited the immediate family, hoping for quality time with his sons and grandchildren. Kate arrived with William and the children, looking refreshed and happy in the casual country setting. She wore a simple sweater and jeans, her hair pulled back in a ponytail, and Charles found himself thinking she had never looked more beautiful. The informal atmosphere allowed for longer conversations and more intimate moments between family members. During a walk through the castle grounds, Charles found himself alone with Kate while William played football with the children nearby. The autumn air was crisp, and fallen leaves crunched under their feet as they strolled along the familiar paths of his childhood. "I've always loved this place," Kate said, breathing in the fresh Highland air. "There's something magical about being so far from everything, surrounded by all this natural beauty." Charles nodded, pleased that she appreciated the landscape that meant so much to him. "I used to come here as a boy when the pressures of royal life became overwhelming. These hills have always been my sanctuary." They paused by a small stone bridge that crossed a babbling stream. Kate leaned against the weathered stones, and Charles found himself studying her profile as she watched the water flow beneath them. In this moment, away from the formality of royal duties, she seemed more like the woman he had always imagined he might find someday. "Sometimes I wonder what life would have been like if I had made different choices," Charles said quietly, surprising himself with his honesty. Kate turned to look at him, sensing the deeper meaning behind his words. "We all have moments of wondering what if, but I think our choices lead us exactly where we're meant to be." "Do you really believe that?" Charles asked, stepping closer to her on the narrow bridge. "I have to," Kate replied softly. "Otherwise, all the difficult moments, all the sacrifices would feel meaningless." For a moment, they stood in silence, both aware of an unspoken tension between them. Charles felt an overwhelming urge to reach out and touch her hand, to confess feelings that he barely understood himself. Kate seemed to sense his internal struggle and gently stepped back from the bridge. "We should rejoin the others," she said quietly, but not unkindly. That evening at dinner, Camilla noticed the charged atmosphere between Charles and Kate. While the conversation flowed normally around the table, she observed the subtle glances they exchanged and the way Charles seemed to hang on Kate's every word. When Kate excused herself early to put the children to bed, Charles's eyes followed her out of the room. Later, as Camilla prepared for bed, she confronted Charles directly for the first time. "Charles, we need to talk about what's happening." He looked up from his book, feigning confusion. "What do you mean?" "You know exactly what I mean. Your feelings for Kate are becoming obvious to everyone, including me." Charles closed his book slowly, unable to deny what Camilla had observed. "I don't know what's happening to me. I never intended for this to develop." Camilla sat on the edge of the bed, her voice steady despite the pain in her heart. "She's William's wife, Charles. She's the mother of your grandchildren. Whatever you think you're feeling, it can only lead to heartbreak for everyone involved." "I know that," Charles said, his voice filled with anguish. "Do you think I haven't told myself that 1,000 times? But I can't seem to control these feelings. She understands me in a way that I've never experienced before." The admission hung in the air between them like a sword. Camilla felt her world shifting beneath her feet as she realized that Charles's feelings for Kate weren't just a passing attraction, but something much deeper and more threatening to their relationship. "And what about us?" Camilla asked, trying to keep her voice from breaking. "What about everything we've built together?" Charles reached for her hand, but she pulled away. "I don't want to hurt you, Camilla. You've been everything to me for so many years, but I can't pretend these feelings don't exist." Camilla stood and walked to the window, looking out at the moonlit Scottish landscape. She had always known that loving Charles meant accepting the complications that came with his position and his past, but she had never imagined facing a situation where she would have to compete with someone so fundamentally unreachable. "What do you want me to do, Charles? Stand by and watch while you fall in love with someone you can never have? Watch our relationship crumble because of an impossible fantasy?" Charles had no answer for her. He knew she was right about the impossibility of the situation, But that knowledge didn't diminish the intensity of his feelings. For the first time in their long relationship, he couldn't offer her the reassurance she needed. The next morning, the family gathered for breakfast, but the atmosphere had changed. Camilla was polite but distant, while Charles seemed distracted and uncomfortable. Kate noticed the tension but couldn't understand its source. William, focused on entertaining the children, remained oblivious to the undercurrents affecting the adults. As they prepared to leave Balmoral, Camilla made a decision that would change everything. She would not force Charles to choose between his feelings and their relationship. Instead, she would quietly begin to step back, allowing him to discover for himself whether his attraction to Kate was worth destroying everything they had built together. The drive back to London was silent. Both Charles and Camilla lost in their own thoughts about what the future might hold. The subtle changes in Camilla's behavior began immediately upon their return to London. She started declining invitations to events where Kate would be present, claiming previous commitments or feeling unwell. Her usual warmth toward Charles became more reserved, and their intimate conversations about daily life gradually decreased. Charles noticed the shift but chose not to address it directly, perhaps because he felt guilty about the truth behind Camilla's withdrawal. Instead, he threw himself more deeply into his royal duties, which inevitably brought him into more frequent contact with Kate during family events and shared engagements. At a charity gala supporting children's mental health, Charles and Kate found themselves working closely together to greet donors and speak with beneficiaries. Kate's natural empathy with the young people they met impressed Charles deeply. He watched as she knelt down to speak with a shy teenager, her gentle questions helping the girl open up about her struggles. "You have an extraordinary gift with people," Charles told Kate during a quiet moment between conversations. "You make everyone feel seen and valued." Kate smiled, but something in Charles's tone made her look at him more carefully. "Thank you. I just try to remember that everyone has a story worth hearing." As the evening progressed, Charles found himself staying close to Kate, offering his arm as they moved between groups, and engaging in longer conversations than strictly necessary. Other family members and staff began to notice the attention he was paying to her, though Kate herself seemed focused on the event's purpose rather than the personal dynamics around her. Meanwhile, Camilla was at home having excused herself from the gala with a headache. She sat in their private sitting room surrounded by photographs documenting their years together. Official portraits, candid moments from holidays, pictures from their wedding day. Each image reminded her of the love they had shared and the challenges they had overcome together. Her phone buzzed with text messages from friends at the gala, innocuous updates that nonetheless painted a picture of Charles and Kate spending considerable time together. One message mentioned how natural they looked together, how Charles seemed more animated than usual when speaking with Kate. When Charles returned home that night, he found Camilla reading in bed, her expression carefully neutral. He began describing the evening's success, the funds raised, and the positive response from attendees. But as he spoke, Kate's name came up repeatedly, her insights about the programs, her connections with the beneficiaries, her suggestions for future initiatives. "It sounds like Kate made quite an impression," Camilla said quietly, not looking up from her book. Charles paused, suddenly aware of how much he had been talking about her. "She's very committed to the cause." "Yes, you've mentioned that before." Camilla finally looked at him, and Charles saw something in her eyes that made his heart sink, a resignation that was somehow worse than anger or jealousy. Over the following days, the pattern continued. Camilla became increasingly absent from joint activities, often scheduling her own engagements at times that conflicted with family events. When she was present, she remained polite but emotionally distant, as if she was protecting herself from further hurt. Charles, meanwhile, seemed to seek out opportunities to be around Kate. He offered to attend events that weren't typically on his schedule, volunteered for joint initiatives, and found reasons to visit Kensington Palace more frequently. Each interaction with Kate felt both thrilling and torturous, as he was constantly aware of the boundaries he could never cross. During a visit to discuss upcoming Christmas celebrations, Charles arrived at Kensington Palace to find Kate in the garden with the children. She was helping Prince Louis build a fort out of fallen leaves, while Charlotte and George chased each other around the autumn garden. The scene was so domestic and joyful that Charles stood watching from the window for several minutes before announcing his presence. "Uncle Charles." The children called out when they saw him, running to embrace him with leaf-covered hands. Kate brushed debris from her sweater and smiled apologetically. "Sorry, we got a bit carried away with our outdoor adventures." "Please don't apologize," Charles said, his voice warmer than he intended. "This is exactly how childhood should be, full of mess and laughter." They spent an hour in the garden together, Charles helping to build the leaf fort while Kate prepared hot chocolate for everyone. Watching her move easily between maternal duties and engaging conversation, Charles felt a deep longing for this kind of simple family happiness. When William returned from his own engagement, he found his father and wife sitting on the garden bench, watching the children play while sharing quiet conversation. Something about the scene struck him as significant, though he couldn't quite identify what felt different. "Dad, you're here early," William said, joining them on the bench. "I wanted to discuss the Christmas schedule, but it seems I've been recruited for garden duty instead," Charles replied, trying to sound casual. As they discussed holiday plans, William noticed how his father's attention seemed focused more on Kate than on the conversation. When Kate excused herself to take the children inside for baths, Charles's eyes followed her until she disappeared from view. That evening, William mentioned the visit to Kate as they prepared for bed. "Dad seemed different today," William observed. "More relaxed, but also more focused on you than usual." Kate paused while brushing her hair. "What do you mean?" "I'm not sure exactly. He just seemed very attentive to everything you said and did. Maybe I'm imagining things." Kate set down her brush, a slight frown crossing her face. She had sensed something different in Charles's behavior lately, but had attributed it to shared interests in their charitable work. The idea that it might be something more personal made her uncomfortable. "He's been very supportive of the mental health initiatives," she said carefully. "Perhaps he's just pleased to see the program succeeding." But as she lay in bed that night, Kate found herself thinking about Charles's behavior, the lingering looks, the way he seemed to seek out her company. For the first time, she wondered if William's observation might indicate something she needed to be concerned about. The delicate balance that had been maintaining their family relationships was beginning to shift in ways that none of them could control. The crisis came during the annual Christmas preparations at Sandringham Estate. The entire royal family had gathered for what should have been a joyful celebration, but underlying tensions made the atmosphere feel fragile. Camilla had grown increasingly withdrawn, participating in activities but maintaining an emotional distance that everyone could sense. Charles found himself constantly aware of Kate's presence, noting what she wore, listening for her voice in conversations, and seeking opportunities to speak with her privately. During the traditional Christmas Eve service at St. Mary Magdalene Church, he positioned himself so he could watch her face during the hymns, moved by her genuine devotion and the peaceful expression she wore during prayers. After the service, as families gathered for photographs on the church steps, Charles lingered near Kate longer than necessary, their conversation extending well beyond polite pleasantries. Camilla stood nearby, her smile fixed for the cameras while her heart broke a little more with each moment she watched. "Shall we head back for tea?" William suggested, noticing his wife seemed to be the center of his father's attention once again. As they walked back to the estate, Kate found herself troubled by the situation she was beginning to recognize. Charles's behavior had become impossible to ignore, and she realized that her initial instinct to dismiss William's observations had been naive. That evening, during the family's private Christmas Eve dinner, the tension reached a breaking point. Charles was more animated than he had been in months, telling stories and engaging enthusiastically in conversation. But Camilla sat quietly at the other end of the table, picking at her food and responding minimally when addressed directly. After dinner, as the family gathered in the drawing room for their traditional gift exchange, Camilla quietly excused herself, claiming fatigue. Charles offered to accompany her, but she declined with a polite but firm refusal. "Please stay and enjoy the evening with your family," she said, her words carrying a weight that only Charles fully understood. As Camilla left the room, Kate noticed the pained expression that crossed Charles's face. For the first time, she began to understand the full scope of what was happening. Charles's growing attention to her was affecting his relationship with Camilla, and Kate felt a deep sense of responsibility for the pain she was inadvertently causing. Later that evening, after the children had been put to bed and the family had retired to their rooms, Kate found herself walking the halls of Sandringham, unable to sleep. She had always loved the historic estate during Christmas, with its warm lights and festive decorations, but tonight the atmosphere felt heavy with unspoken problems. She was surprised to find Charles in the library, sitting by the fireplace with a glass of whiskey, staring into the flames. He looked up when she entered, his face showing a mixture of pleasure and pain at seeing her. "I couldn't sleep either," Kate said softly, settling into the chair across from him. "Too much rich food and excitement," Charles replied, though they both knew that wasn't the real reason for their restlessness. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, the crackling fire the only sound in the room. Finally, Kate gathered the courage to address what had been weighing on her mind. "Charles, I need to ask you something, and I hope you'll be honest with me." He looked at her intently, sensing the seriousness in her voice. "Have I done something to make things difficult between you and Camilla? She seems so unhappy lately, and I can't help but feel somehow responsible." Charles set down his glass and leaned forward, his expression growing pained. "Kate, you haven't done anything wrong." "The problem isn't with anything you've said or done. Then what is it?" she asked gently. Charles struggled with how to answer her question honestly without crossing lines that could never be uncrossed. Sometimes we develop feelings that we never intended, feelings that can't be acted upon but are nonetheless real. Kate felt her heart sink as she understood what he was trying to tell her. "Charles, I'm William's wife. I love my husband and our family more than anything in the world." "I know that," Charles said quickly. "I would never ask you to be anything other than what you are. But I can't control how I feel when I'm around you, and Camilla can see it. She's protecting herself the only way she knows how." The honesty of his admission hung between them like a bridge neither could cross. Kate felt tears welling up in her eyes as she realized the impossible situation they were all trapped in. "What do we do now?" she whispered. Charles stood and walked to the window looking out at the snow-covered grounds. "I don't know. I've never been in a situation like this before. I love Camilla, but these feelings for you seem to be beyond my control." Kate wiped away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. "Charles, you have to fight these feelings. Camilla loves you deeply, and she's been by your side through everything. You can't throw that away for something that can never be." "I know you're right," Charles said, his voice barely audible. "But knowing something intellectually and being able to control your heart are two different things." Kate stood and moved toward the door, knowing that staying longer would only make the situation more difficult for both of them. "I think it's best if we limit our time together," she said sadly, "at least until you can work through this." Charles nodded, though the thought of seeing less of Kate felt like losing something precious. "You're probably right." As Kate reached the door, she turned back one final time. "Charles, Camilla is a wonderful woman who deserves better than to wonder if the man she loves wishes he were with someone else. Please don't let these feelings destroy what you have with her." After she left, Charles remained by the window until dawn, wrestling with emotions that threatened to upend everything he held dear. The weeks following Christmas were marked by a profound shift in the family dynamics. True to her word, Kate began politely declining invitations to events where she would be alone with Charles, and when family duties required their presence together, she maintained a professional but distant demeanor. Charles felt the loss of Kate's warmth acutely, but her withdrawal forced him to confront the reality of what he had been risking. During long sleepless nights, he reflected on his relationship with Camilla and the years of love and support she had given him. He began to understand that his infatuation with Kate had been as much about escaping the complexities of his life as it had been about genuine feelings. Camilla, meanwhile, had begun making preparations for what she feared might be inevitable. She quietly consulted with her closest friends about maintaining her dignity if her relationship with Charles deteriorated further. But she also watched carefully for signs of whether Charles might come to his senses and fight for their relationship. The turning point came during a quiet February evening when Charles returned home to find Camilla packing a suitcase in their bedroom. The sight of her methodically folding clothes and placing them in the luggage filled him with panic. "Where are you going?" he asked, his voice betraying his fear. Camilla looked up from her packing, her expression sad but resolute. "I'm going to stay at my sister's house for a while. I think we both need some space to figure out what we really want." Charles sat heavily on the edge of the bed, watching the woman who had been his companion for so many years prepare to leave him. "Camilla, please don't go. We can work through this, can we, Charles?" she asked, pausing in her packing. "Because for the past few months I felt like I've been competing with a ghost. Someone I can never be. Someone you can never have. I can't continue living like that." The pain in her voice finally broke through the fog that had been clouding Charles's judgment. He saw clearly for the first time how his behavior had been slowly destroying the woman he truly did love. "You're right," he said quietly. "I've been a fool and I've hurt you terribly. But please don't leave. Let me prove to you that what we have is worth fighting for." Camilla stopped packing and looked at him directly. "What exactly are you saying, Charles?" "I'm saying that I've been chasing an impossible dream while ignoring the real love that's been right in front of me. Kate is William's wife, and she always will be. But you're my partner, my confidant, the person who has stood by me through everything. I don't want to lose that. And your feelings for Kate?" Charles was quiet for a long moment, considering his answer carefully. "I think I confused admiration and attraction with something deeper. Kate represents a kind of life I thought I wanted, but the truth is I already have the life I need with you." Camilla studied his face, looking for signs of sincerity. "Charles, I can't go through this again. If you're not completely sure about us, about choosing our relationship over these fantasies, then it's better for both of us if I leave now." Charles stood and gently took the clothes from her hands, setting them aside. "I am sure. I've been stupid and selfish, but I'm sure about us. Please give me the chance to prove it." Over the following months, Charles worked deliberately to rebuild his relationship with Camilla. He made a conscious effort to limit his contact with Kate to necessary family functions, and when they did interact, he maintained appropriate boundaries. More importantly, he began to rediscover the qualities that had originally drawn him to Camilla. They took long walks together, traveled to places that held special meaning for them, and gradually rebuilt the intimacy that had been damaged by Charles's emotional wandering. Camilla, cautiously at first, began to trust that Charles was genuinely committed to their relationship. Kate, observing from a distance, felt relief that the family tensions were beginning to ease. She had always cared about both Charles and Camilla, and seeing them work to repair their relationship brought her genuine happiness. She continued to maintain appropriate boundaries, but the strain of the previous months gradually lifted. During a family gathering in late spring, Camilla attended a function with Charles where Kate was also present. For the first time in months, Camilla felt secure enough in her relationship to be genuinely warm toward Kate, engaging in natural conversation without the undercurrent of tension that had marked their previous interactions. Charles watched the two women talking and laughing together, and felt a deep sense of gratitude for what he had almost lost. He realized that his attraction to Kate had been real, but it had been based more on fantasy than on the kind of deep partnership he had built with Camilla over many years. As the evening wound down, Charles and Camilla walked home together through the London streets, their hands intertwined. The crisis had passed, but it had also taught them both valuable lessons about the fragility of love and the importance of choosing to nurture the relationships that truly matter. "I'm sorry for what I put you through," Charles said as they paused under a streetlight. Camilla squeezed his hand. "We both learned something important. Love isn't just about feelings. It's about the choice to keep choosing each other, even when other possibilities present themselves." Charles nodded, understanding that their relationship was stronger now, because they had faced this challenge and chosen to fight for what they had built together. As they continued walking home, both felt a renewed appreciation for the love that had weathered yet another storm and emerged more resilient than before.